Hi, kids. Did you ever have one of those headaches where it feels like your forehead is just about to explode? Yeah, me neither. Welcome to History with Mr. E. We're going over 23.1 and we're coming on to the progressive era today. Um, America at the turn of the 20th century was a pretty exciting place to be. We had just won a war, our industry was booming, and we're entering a new era of industrial revolution. The real revolution, though, in my opinion, happened in uh, quality of living or quality of home life for Americans. Think of these new conveniences that were introduced during the early part of the 20th century. Central heating. You didn't have to start a fire in a stove in every room of your house. Gas lights. Not quite as convenient as electric lights. And if you left one on without it burning, you would suffocate and die from gas, but still. Next up, electric lights. Much better than gas lights. Um, and to the point that we still use them today. Antiseptics. Can you imagine how many soldiers' lives may have been saved during the Civil War, or the 3,000 American soldiers that died during the Spanish American War from disease as opposed to the 400 that died from battle wounds? Antiseptics could have saved many, if not most, of those lives. Also, X-rays um, came about during this era, and a few years later in the 20th century became very popular to the point where you could go to a shoe store and have your feet X-rayed by an incredibly dangerous and cancer-causing X-ray machine, and for a pointless reason. Because I mean, do you really need to see the bones inside your feet to see if a shoe is going to fit well? Also, inoculations. Um, Vaccines came about during this era, which is huge. Life expectancy, due to many of these modern conveniences, um, went and rose to 48 years of age for males and 51 years of age for females. But statistically, it's probably easy to understand, or I hope you guys understand, that those males that lived 3 years less than the females were probably ready to die by the time they'd lived with a female for 48 years already. Um, Another massive innovation during this era was the Model T Ford. Henry Ford not only built um, the modern assembly line, but he did it to such an extent that um, in 1895 there were 4 registered cars in the United States. By 1940 there were 27 million registered cars in the United States. Um, and that's more than triple what they had in 1920 at only 8 million. Uh, by 2005, of course, there were 136 million registered cars in the United States because everybody here drives. Um, in 1913, the assembly line was so well done. Of course, the assembly line is a factory technique where instead of you sitting down with a pile of parts and building a car from the ground up, you would get the car, come down a conveyor belt, and you would bolt on a wheel, and then it would go on to the next person who would do a task. And 10 seconds later, you'd have another wheel to bolt on to the next car, or something along those lines. And they were literally pumping out a car in 90 minutes on the assembly line, which also meant one car every 10 seconds. The Model T by 1925 had dropped from 800 and some odd dollars to $300. From 1908 to 1927, he sold 15 million Model Ts. The crazy thing about Model Ts is they were only ever sold in one style, one color, and didn't have any specialty bits and bobs with it. Like now, you can buy a car, you can choose the color, you can choose all the extra stuff with it: the stereo, heated seats, an automatic open and close lift gate, sunroof, Bluetooth, and all that garbage. Henry Ford was heard to say that you can choose any color you wanted of Model T as long as that color was black, which sounds a little racist to me, but whatever. Um, if you look at the picture in your book with the Model Ts driving through the city, every single car is the same. Like, how would you know? What if you forgot where you parked your car in a parking lot? Would you just jump in someone else's and drive it off? I mean, it could take you hours. I don't even know, honestly, if they had separate keys or if you just pushed a button. I guess you would have to deal with your license plate, have to know your license plate number to make sure you got in the right stinking car. One great thing about Model Ts, or not Model Ts, but the Ford factory, was that they paid above average wages. And they also were pumping out so many cars that this stimulated other industries: the lumber industry because they needed wood for the cars, the rubber industry because they needed tires for the cars, the shipping industry because they needed to have all the parts shipped in by train. And Ford was able to do a lot of good things with that money. I've been to Dearborn to the Ford Museum, and it was pretty cool. Although, like, the cars were fun to look at, and the trains were fun to look at, but then you go into like this giant section of like picnic baskets and tablecloths or some stupidity that I mean, even my mom got bored looking at it, and she loves that kind of stuff. Another major innovation of this era was the birth of aviation. The Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur, owned a bicycle shop in Ohio, the second greatest state in the Union behind Pennsylvania, and the state in which I was born. But at a way different time than Orville and Wilbur. Orville and Wilbur? Wilbur and Orville? I guess it is getting late. They built an internal combustion engine and mounted it onto a glider and put some wheels on that glider, some skids actually on the glider, pulled it down a beach in North Carolina called Kitty Hawk, and it flew for just a few seconds, but it was officially the first powered flight. And after that, aviation took off. Once we figured out that we could do it, then we got people who would better engineer it, and aviation became a major industry, of course, in America, as it still is today, for everything from passenger planes to shipping to machines of war. The first flight was 12/17/1903. Just 20 years after Mrs. Flynn was born. I'm just kidding. If you see this, Mrs. Flynn, don't be mad. That was just a joke. I know that you're not that old. Another major innovation of this era was communication. Marconi created the radio, the wireless telegraph, and the wireless telephone, and in 1915 made the first phone call coast to coast from New York to San Francisco. The first commercial broadcast radio station was KDKA in Pittsburgh, and it's still the flagship radio station in the city of Pittsburgh. I used to listen to it every day going to school. Dad didn't want us listening to music stations, and honestly, we didn't listen to secular music anyhow. We always listened to country. I did not listen to country, and don't let anybody tell you that I did. I listened to Christian music, and if we weren't plugging a CD player into the tape deck with an adapter than we were listening to John Fedko in the mornings on KDKA Pittsburgh. Mail went for rural free delivery, which meant that you could get post taken to your house out in the country. That happened in 1900. 1913, they had parcel post, which meant they would take packages to your house and not just letters. And then airmail started in 1918. It's a far cry from the Pony Express. And, you know, was the early death knell for mail going by train in the United States. When we go on our train museum field trip, the mail car is easily one of the neater cars that we're going to get to see. There were three factors that caused rapid growth in industry in America during this era. The three factors being electricity became widespread. Electricity became widespread and was run to factories, of course, obviously. The internal combustion engine became a thing, and you didn't have to be near water to turn a water wheel to run big machines at your mill. And of course, automation in manufacturing with things like the assembly line sped up manufacturing tremendously. And also, people became more prosperous. Banks were set up just for people to save money in. Before, you used the money to live. Now you could save some money so that you could actually retire someday, or could have some leisure time in your life. Go to a movie, take a vacation, take a trip, go to a baseball game. Things like that began in this era for America. Property value went up 50% from 1880 to 1890, and all classes, lower, middle, and upper class, grew and prospered during this era. That's all for this lesson. I'm going to go take some Tylenol for this headache.